Okay, this is our second set of notes for Unit 4. This is going in your lecture notebook behind the last set of notes, which was reproduction with cones and flowers. These notes are just going to briefly go over the material that's in your textbook starting on page 618. So just going over how seeds are formed, what's their purpose, and briefly what takes place when germination happens. Okay, you should have a handout. Make sure you fill it in as you go. And also don't forget audio. There's a couple things I'm going to be mentioning audio only. I want to make sure that you guys are getting that stuff too, so make sure you add it into your notes. Okay, let's get started. So, last set of notes we talked about with angiosperms and gymnosperms, kind of how seeds are formed. These set of notes are going to be focusing mainly on angiosperms because something that sets angiosperms and gymnosperms apart is that angiosperms also have the ability to make fruit around the seeds that they produce. Excuse me. Okay, so once fertilization is complete, then the plant is going to kind of redirect nutrients from growing flowers into now building this fruit around this fertilized seed, this growing embryo inside the seed. Okay, and so there's a couple things that happen. As the angiosperm seeds mature, the wall of the ovary, which was, if you recall, the base of the flower where fertilization happened, the walls start to thicken. They start to develop that fruit, okay, and that's going to completely surround the developing seed. And so really all that fruit is a ripened ovary that contains those angiosperm seeds. And they come in all shapes and sizes. For example, here you can see the seeds, the fruit of a maple tree. The seed is inside there. There isn't much in terms of what we'd think of as a typical fruit. Something like an apple maybe, where there's all this extra tissue, extra flesh around the seeds, but that's still considered a fruit for a maple tree. Here's a lychee nut, here's an apple, but you can see they come in all shapes and sizes here. So usually when we think of fruit, the term fruit, we think of things like apples or grapes or strawberries. And yes, those are fruits. They have seeds inside of them. They have, and then they have this flesh around the outside. However, there are other plants that we wouldn't necessarily think of that still qualify as making fruit. So for example, peas, corn, beans, rice, all of these that we would commonly call vegetables. These are also fruit if you think of them in terms of their function for the plant. So they all contain, if it contains a seed enclosed inside an ovary wall, it's considered a fruit, whether it's sweet or not. Okay, so this begs the question, well, why does a plant invest all of this energy, all of these resources into making these fruits? The original, something that people often conclude by mistake, or they think by mistake, is that, oh, it's supposed to help the seed grow. Yes and no. Now, if you mean that in terms of the fruit provides nourishment for the seed, well, that's not true. We know that inside of the seed there's an endosperm, and that endosperm is technically the stored food for that growing embryo. So the fruit around the seed has nothing to do with providing nourishment for that seed. So then why does a plant invest so many resources into making this fruit on the outside that doesn't actually provide nourishment for their seed? So the whole point is that the fruit actually does help the seed, but mostly by allowing it to be attractive to seed dispersers, specifically animals that will eat that fruit and hopefully carry it to another place, kind of just spread it out, move it somewhere else. Will eat that seed, and then eventually when it goes through passes through the digestive tract, will get deposited somewhere else where that seed will now have a better chance to grow and gain the resources it needs to be able to sprout and so on. Okay, so the whole point of that fruit, it's worth the investment because it basically increases the chances that that seed is going to be able to sprout and do well on its own. Okay, not to mention when when an animal eats the fruit, and the waste that's produced, the feces that's produced by that animal, are going to act as a good fertilizer for that seed. So again, providing it with the resources it needs to sprout and grow on its own. Okay, so you end up having kind of like this mutually beneficial relationship between seed dispersing animals and the plants that rely on them. Okay, so that's one major way, and angiosperms rely heavily on animals to disperse their seeds. However, that's not the only way. For example, seeds dispersed by wind or by water are another option, and in the last we've read about it before, talked about it before, how the outer fruit of a seed, or the outer coat of a seed, can be customized to enable it to be dispersed these ways. So for example, seeds that are dispersed by water, like you can see this coconut here, or by wind, like these dandelion seeds right here, are usually lightweight, and that allows them to be able to be dispersed in those ways too. Okay, let's talk about dormancy really quickly here. So even after, when a seed is fertilized and you end up having this this seed that's ready to sprout, it's in the fruit. Okay, there are some seeds that are going to sprout right away. Okay, that they kind of grow instantaneously as soon as they're they're made. However, most seeds go through at least some state of dormancy. So dormancy is this state where even though the embryo is alive, it's not actually growing. Okay, so it's in a state where it's just kind of on pause, if anything. And in fact, certain seeds are going to have longer dormancy than others, but for the most part, that's almost like a protective feature, okay? Environmental factors like temperature or moisture are going to cause a seed to end dormancy. And so it's almost like the seed is putting itself on pause until the right conditions are there, that there's enough water nearby that will be enough to help that seed do well, to grow, or temperature wise as well, that it's not too hot or too cold, so that seed is going to be able to grow in the ideal conditions. Okay, and this actually is really helpful if you think about the fact that there are some seeds that travel a long distance. And, if you have this seed traveling quite a long way, you wouldn't want it to sprout before it's in the right conditions, in the right soil with the right amount of water and temperature and so on. And so a lot of times that ends up being a way for that plant to just do the best it can when it sprouts. That's actually the reason why we have seeds. When you buy seeds in the store, they often seem kind of dry and everything. It's not that they're dead, they're just waiting for the ideal conditions for them to be able to sprout. So what are those ideal conditions? Generally speaking, it depends on the plant, to be honest, but usually the two main things are temperature and especially water. And water actually plays a role in jump-starting the whole germination process. So usually when a seed germinates, it's going to start by absorbing a bunch of water, which is why a lot of times we can speed that up. If you were to take a bean and kind of soak it in water, what you're doing is you're allowing the germination process to start. A lot of times we end up cooking those beans, for example, before we eat them, but that's actually the start of this process, going from a dry bean to a plant. So absorption of water happens first, and then what ends up happening is the endosperm inside of the seed, because of all that water that it's now, makes its way through the seed coat and causes that endosperm, those food storing tissues, to swell up. And when they swell up, they cause the seed coat to crack open. So that seed coat is meant to be a tough, durable layer, and really, the it will only crack open when there's enough water to allow that endosperm to swell up. Okay, when the seed coat cracks, then the first thing that comes out is the root, and it's called a radicle. You can see it right here. It's kind of faint, but there's a much clearer diagram in your textbook if you want to look at it. But that radicle or root emerges first and starts growing downwards. And then eventually, the rest of the plant will grow as well. Now, the way that the growth happens depends on whether we're looking at monocots or dicots. So this is our last slide, and you're going to actually fill this in. We're going to do things a little bit differently here. I want you guys to actually look into the differences between monocot and dicot. So this is the last slide of the notes for you to fill in. These two diagrams, actually, you can find them in your textbook, page 621, and you're welcome to use that page as a resource for this, or if you want to use online resources, that's fine too. But I would like you to compare and contrast monocot and dicot. So I'm not looking for a lot of information, just 3 differences that you can see that is talked about between the way that monocots, like this corn, germinate and sprout, and the way that dicots, like this bean plant, sprouts. Okay, 3 differences, you can list them here, and 2 similarities between the two, you can list them here. Now, if you don't have a ton of room here, that's totally fine. You can just write these on the notebook page that these set of notes are taped onto. Okay, but you're gonna go ahead and fill this in to finish up your notes, and we're done. Okay, thanks.